recently, a major American economist published a book which was really about the end of the dollar system. And I find that very interesting because historically, major US academics have always talked up the dollar system. But I think that we have now come to a stage where it's being challenged. In reality, of course, the demise has been a long time coming because, as I've been arguing in my various books and articles on geopolitical economy, the dollar system was never stable. It never served the world very well for the simple reason that the currency of one country can never, in a stable way, be the currency of the whole world. So there is nothing natural about it, even though many US-based commentators have tried to naturalize it. And they often compare it to the sterling system. But the sterling system essentially worked because Britain had a vast empire, and Britain was able to extract tribute from the non-settler parts, the non-white parts of that empire, and export it as capital to Europe, to the United States, and to its white settler colonies like Canada, Australia, etc. This is why these countries developed and industrialized so rapidly in the late 19th century. The Americans had no such empire, and the dollar's reliance on deficits as a way of providing liquidity was always problematic. And in recent years, what you've seen is an expansion of financial activity in order to shore up the dollar system. But in reality, what you're going to see is the system is coming to its limits, which we can discuss some of the contradictions of later. But let me just say that there are two elements involved in the demise of the dollar system. There is a spread of bilateral agreements of countries agreeing to use one another's currency in trade. There's that. There are also, of course, there's a wider number of countries that are going to accept certain currencies. The euro is one of them. Obviously, the renminbi is another. So, wider acceptance of these currencies. But the other element that could very well determine the fate of the dollar is actually the internal contradictions of the dollar system itself. So today the contradiction has reached a very sharp point because on the one hand, the dollar system relies on a vast expansion of financial activity, and in recent decades, this vast expansion of financial activity has rested on easy monetary policy. But that easy monetary policy had to be stopped because of the rise of inflation. So the rise of inflation has forced the Federal Reserve to increase interest rates. But now the Federal Reserve dare not raise it further because if it were to rise further, it would prick the asset bubbles that have kept money flowing into the dollar system and kept the dollar system going. He has two options. One is to deal with inflation by pricking the asset bubbles, which will lead to a crash of the dollar system. And the other alternative is he can tolerate inflation, which will slowly undermine the value of the dollar. So he's caught between a rock and a hard place. And that's why the imminent demise of the dollar system is coming. It's not just because of the bilateral agreements. And let me say one final thing. These bilateral agreements can sometimes work if the trade between two countries is relatively balanced, but they very often don't work when there are very big imbalances. Let me take the example of Russia's trade with India. Russia's trade with India is based on rupee-ruble trade. There is such a bilateral agreement. But unfortunately, the result of this agreement is that the Russians are sitting on a pile of rupees that they cannot use because Russia exports a lot to India but does not wish to import very much from India. Whereas India imports a lot from Russia, pays Russia in rupees with them. Of course, it has a lot to buy from Russia, not just oil, but also various other products, defense equipment, and so on. For all of these reasons, any imbalance cannot be addressed by such bilateral agreements. For that, you need some form of world money, and the replacement of the dollar cannot come by, another national currency posing as the world currency. If we ever have world money again, it will have to take the form of some kind of a multilateral agreement of the sort Keynes had recommended back in 1944 at Bretton Woods, which would involve creating a currency which would not be used by you and me to buy shoes or shirts or what have you, but only by central banks in order to settle imbalances among them. And there will be rules governing how this could be done and so on. And we can discuss all those rules. So it's either we have that sort of agreement with enough countries coming together into it, or we will be witnessing a regionalization of the payment system. So with euro, dollar, renminbi, and a few other currencies playing a big role.